Picture this. It's mid-October 2025. Three members of a church in St. Paul, Minnesota come down with what they totally assume is just your standard seasonal flu. But within days, they were dead. The frantic, terrifying scramble in the hospital hallways that followed confirmed public health officials' absolute worst nightmare. They weren't dealing with influenza. They were staring down something completely unknown.
Welcome to this explainer on the SPARS pandemic, which spanned from 2025 to 2028. We're going to dive into how this period left an indelible mark on the globe. But you know, what's truly fascinating and honestly tragic about this whole event isn't just the clinical crisis itself. It was a catastrophic failure of modern communication. A medical emergency rapidly morphed into a deadly crisis of public trust. Let's look at exactly how it all unfolded.
Part 1. The Spark in St. Paul, a localized medical mystery that was literally about to ignite.
The initial outbreak moved with absolutely terrifying speed. Right after those first deaths in mid-October, the World Health Organization was officially notified of a potential global emergency by November 17th. But the real inflection point? That hit in late November. The virus completely capitalized on the Thanksgiving and Black Friday travel rush. You had millions of Americans on the move, unknowingly carrying this pathogen right out of the Midwest and spreading it coast to coast.
And the tragic irony here really comes down to the official messaging at the time. The CDC calmly tweeted out things like, "Happy Thanksgiving, be safe on Black Friday," just advising people to, wash your hands often. Authorities were treating this imminent threat like it was standard, manageable seasonal flu. They completely underestimated the explosive, devastating spread happening right while people were out shopping.
So what exactly were we facing? SPARS-CoV. That stands for St. Paul Acute Respiratory Syndrome Coronavirus. It was a highly contagious pathogen, mostly spread through droplets. But its absolute deadliest feature? Its stealth. Because early, mild cases mimicked the common flu so perfectly, countless infectious folks just never isolated. They went to work, they visited family, assuming they just had a bug, and silently fueled a full-blown pandemic.
Part 2. A desperate cure. As cases skyrocketed into the frantic winter of 2025, officials found themselves backed into a very tight corner. With hospital beds filling up incredibly fast, the government made a desperate gamble. They initiated the controversial rollout of Caliciver as a frontline therapeutic. Now, Caliciver was an unapproved drug originally developed years earlier for SARS. It was never designed for SPARS, but it was pushed forward rapidly as an emergency treatment, honestly just because authorities desperately needed to offer a panicked public something. Then, in January 2026, we hit this really bizarre paradox. The CDC published data showing the actual case fatality rate was 1.1%. To put that into perspective, that is drastically lower than the terrifying initial estimates of nearly 5%. You'd think this hard data would calm everyone down, right? But actually, public panic skyrocketed. Anxiety just drove citizens to rush to clinics for the absolute slightest cough, demanding a prescription for Caliciver.
Part 3. Going viral. This is the exact moment the official medical narrative completely collapsed under the overwhelming weight of the internet.
It all kicked off with a single harrowing micro-narrative. A 3-year-old boy in North Carolina, hospitalized with SPARS, was caught on camera vomiting immediately after taking a dose of Caliciver. That highly visceral video hit social media and spread like absolute wildfire. Millions watched a toddler in distress, and overnight it sparked a massive viral anti-drug backlash.
What emerged next was a massive communication disconnect. On one side, you had official clinical FDA health advisories that were stiff, unsympathetic, and rigidly fact-based. And they were pitted directly against highly emotional, grassroots social media campaigns declaring the drug was literal poison. When the government coldly stated that vomiting wasn't a known side effect, they completely failed to validate the very real fear parents were experiencing. The emotional, viral narrative won the war handily, convincing millions that the cure was worse than the disease.
And the crisis just kept deepening. By June 2026, devastating headlines hit the presses. Clinical trials finally proved that Caliciver was in fact barely effective at all. It was basically on par with older, low-efficacy drugs. Suddenly, the public realized the government had spent millions pushing an ineffective drug with questionable side effects. Official credibility was left in absolute ruins.
Part 4. The Vaccine Divide. It's summer 2026. The real solution finally arrived, but to an incredibly hostile audience. So, the highly anticipated Coronavax vaccine was finally released, but it collided head-on with a deeply fragmented society.
Driven by hashtags like #NoVax and #NotMyKids, fear, historical mistrust of the medical establishment, and the algorithm-driven echo chamber effect mobilized a massive, deeply entrenched anti-vaccination movement. People vehemently rejected the shot.
The physical consequences of this societal divide were severe. Because the population wasn't fully protected, a horrifying secondary wave struck late in the year. Secondary bacterial pneumonia surged 4 to 8 months after the initial SPARS infection. It ravaged 30 to 40% of children and up to 20% of adults. People were left literally gasping for air, and this sudden massive spike triggered a terrifying nationwide antibiotic shortage.
To truly grasp the human toll here, consider the profound personal journey of Alyssa Karpowicz. She was a leading, outspoken voice in the natural medicine anti-vaccine movement. But then, her youngest son Lennon contracted this severe secondary pneumonia. With national stockpiles completely depleted, she was forced to accept expired government antibiotics just to save her child's life. This shattering real-world consequence forced her to publicly change her stance. It perfectly represents the incredibly painful reality so many parents faced when their deep-seated beliefs collided with a lethal infection.
Part 5. The lingering scars. The pandemic eventually receded, but the unexpected, long-term consequences of the rush to find a cure definitely remained.
In May 2027, a brand new battleground emerged. Official federal CholeraVax reports up against independent, crowdsourced epidemiology. Slick, visually appealing crowdsourced analyses that mapped out long-term CholeraVax side effects went incredibly viral online. Because institutional trust was already fundamentally broken at this point, these interactive, citizen-led charts completely drowned out the government's official scientifically vetted safety data.
And the thing is, there was a sobering reality behind these public fears. The vaccine did, in fact, have actual lingering neurological issues for a small subset of the population. Citizens began using the PrEP Act to file for compensation due to these side effects. It became this painful wave of lawsuits from injured patients desperately seeking help from a burned-out, deeply distrusted system.
Finally, our historical timeline concludes in August 2028. The SPARS pandemic was officially declared over, with the virus successfully contained to animal reservoirs. But while the clinical emergency officially ended, society was left deeply, deeply fractured. The true damage wasn't just the tragic lives lost to the virus, it was the complete breakdown of our shared reality.
Which leaves us with a critical, really profound question. When the next pandemic strikes, will our greatest threat be the pathogen itself or our inability to trust each other? It forces us to realize that an infodemic, a crisis of misinformation, echo chambers, and broken communication can be just as lethal as any virus. Thank you so much for exploring this sobering history with me in today's Explainer, and I hope it leaves you with plenty to think about. Until next time.